Unfazed by job losses, dot-com crashes and factory closures, and he urges others to think as he does. He argues that individuals can be powerful even in a downturn because they have talent, which is much more of value to a company than any material asset.
Number one, this Marxistic force, if I might call it that, basically implies a power shift. It is no longer companies that hire people. It is good people that hire companies. It's the other way around. This in effect means that we will have to treat people with much more respect than we have done historically. Historically, you and I were basically a production resource or maybe a human resource. Now we are not. We will more and more become individuals that do have a very specific knowledge or talent that the company or the business is interested in. They have to treat us as the stars that we actually are.
Now, this idea seems very alien to most people. Like this morning I came in here on the train, people didn't look or feel like stars, they looked pretty depressed. How can people see themselves as stars and in some way unique when the corporation is telling them the opposite?
Of course. I mean, that's a part of the game, to tell the workforce that you can be forced to leave any day. You are not particularly valuable. Of course, that keeps the wages down, and that keeps a certain pressure on the workforce. That will change. It is already changing, and it will continue to move in that direction. That's number one. Having said that, this will imply differences in our respective countries and cities, as well as within companies. Differences because some of us are very good at something. Some of us are not. It's called talent.
Not everybody feels uniquely talented. What would be your blueprint for those people?
It would be to figure out that little area where you or me or any of our brothers or sisters do have where we are extremely skilled, because it might be playing the guitar, it might be appearing on TV, it might be as a carpenter, I don't know. We are so different. But what life has learned, at least me, is that most of us do have an area where we are small stars.
We seem to be having a recession in Ireland now. Do talented people have to wait until the recession is over to make their move?
Not necessarily so, but I can understand that you have to pay the rent, which in effect means that you might have to do something for half a year or 1 year that you not necessarily like to do, just in order to pay the rent. But mind you, a recession, and even a deep recession, doesn't change the fact that individuals are gaining power in our time, which in effect means that long-term wise, and by long-term in this case I mean 1.5 to 3 years, these forces are still at work, which in effect means that the value of this individual is in the process of increasing anyway. It fluctuates a little bit short-term wise. Yes, I can understand that. I can understand that the companies of today can use the fact that it is a recession and negotiate with you, put pressure on the deal between you and the company. Yes, they can do that today. But 1.5 years from now, we are back to what we are talking about, and then it's you.
Let's look at companies. Mainly the structures seem to be monolithic, slow-moving, and populated by bureaucrats. What do you think of management bureaucracy?
It was necessary. I can understand that those corporate empires were built. I can also understand that they were built as huge international, in certain cases, bureaucracies. But what we see today is that when you, me, the human beings, become the critical production resource, then this bureaucracy stands between success and the company. It basically hampers them.
Why do management and large corporations seek to treat people like kids?
It's quite simple, actually. Most of the leadership literature, the management theories, the tricks and the tools were created in the beginning of last century, at a time when people on average had spent 3 to 4 years in school, and they needed a lot of guidance. Today, people have on average spent at least 10 years in some kind of school. They don't need all that guidance any longer, which means that we have tools, techniques and principles that are 100 years old. And of course, it creates a lot of problems.
Let's look at the world you've painted. Every company seems to have exactly the same attributes. There's nothing happening at Nokia that is not happening at Ericsson or Motorola, for example. So these days, what does a company have to do to make itself unique?
I think most of us do have a relation to sports. And we do know that motivation is probably the single most important factor for men or women that have dedicated their life to sports. This happens to business now. 20 years ago you could make yourself unique with a certain technology. You can't do that any longer because we could all get hold of a technology. 10 years ago you could make yourself unique with a management tool imported usually from the United States. It's accessible to all of us now. Motivation becomes the single most important thing for companies from now on.
And how do companies and individuals motivate themselves?
I guess that this starts in it will start, and it has already started in the process of how you recruit people. And this is, if you translate what I'm saying now into how you recruit people, it basically implies that you hire people for attitude and train them for skill, rather than the other way around. Because we used to hire people for their skills and then train them for attitude, put them on a trainee program or something like that, because we want them to share the company culture and what have you. But what we see now is companies that hire people for attitude and train for skill, which means that you create a flock of people that share something.
So how does this impact on the individual who's in the public sector and they really feel they want to get out of this, let's say, public sector prison and into what you've described as a flock?
I think what is happening to public sectors in almost all Western European countries today is that it is in the process of being reorganized. The public will finance education, healthcare, what have you, but not necessarily produce education, healthcare, and all the other things that we need in a society. So how we finance the thing through taxes and who is producing becomes more and more two separate issues. This in effect means that the public sector will start to outsource, to buy services. Many of the people that today are working in the public sector and for the public sector will be working within organizations that primarily sell their services.
So if the large monolithic corporation is on its way out, and if party politics doesn't have all the answers, what sort of society do you see in the future?
I see a society where most of us, no matter whether we live here in Europe, Africa or Asia, are becoming richer and richer and richer. That's number one. I'm quite optimistic in those terms. However, though, some of us are getting richer faster than others. Some countries, primarily we here in Western Europe, are becoming much richer much faster. I see countries or regions where the differences increase between those who have the relevant knowledge and or talent that is required today. A rather elitistic kind of society where it is you and your capabilities that defines whether you live a good life or not. This in effect means that there will be differences, significant differences, like there were differences when 150 or 200 years ago, when some of us had land, some of us had not. 50 or 100 years later, some of us had capital. The capitalistic period, some of us had no capital. And now it boils down to our capabilities, our knowledge, and that creates a new kind of a class society. But the winners of today are not necessarily the winners of tomorrow. That's important. It's a redefinition.
Kjell Nordstrom, thank you very much indeed.